Okay, let's dive into something, well, foundational for how we think about learning in school, but maybe seen through a lens from, gosh, over a century ago.
Yeah, a really important voice.
Today, we're cracking open John Dewey's The School and Society. Now, this book, it's not some dry academic text, right? It's actually born out of three uh, lively lectures Dewey gave back in the late 1890s.
Right, to people who are really interested in this experimental school he was running at the University of Chicago. Plus, there's a piece in there about the school itself.
And what's just fascinating, I think, is that even though Dewey was reacting to his world, the late 19th century,
Mm-hmm.
the core questions he's asking, about making education relevant, about how learning really happens, and frankly, about the sheer waste in traditional schooling, they feel incredibly sharp, like right now.
Oh, totally relevant. It's almost uncanny sometimes.
Absolutely. So our mission here in this deep dive is to really try and distill Dewey's core arguments, these kind of revolutionary ideas for why education had to change, like fundamentally.
To keep up with society, basically. A society that was transforming.
Exactly. And to align better with, well, the natural way a child learns and grows.
Yeah.
So we'll look at the bold ideas, the surprising connections he makes, and see how his own school actually tried to put it all into practice.
It's going to be interesting to see how these century-old ideas might actually feel kind of fresh.
Get ready, yeah.
Yeah.
Some might feel brand new. So let's start with, the picture of school most of us have. It's usually that space, right, between a teacher and a student, focusing on academics.
Reading, writing, arithmetic.
Yeah, maybe some history facts, personal progress, grades, learning manners, being prompt. And look, that is important stuff.
Right. Dewey isn't dismissing that at all, but he argues pretty strongly that focusing only there is just way too narrow.
Uh-huh.
His big point, especially in that first lecture, is this. These big pushes for educational change. They aren't just random ideas educators dream up. They're a necessary response, a product, really, of huge shifts happening out there in society.
And he points the finger directly at the Industrial Revolution.
Exactly. That's the engine driving the need for change in schools.
And he really emphasizes how incredibly fast and, well, far-reaching this industrial change was, even back then.
Yeah, we're talking harnessing new power sources, a global market emerging,
Yeah.
huge manufacturing cities popping up, almost instant communication.
He saw it as a fundamental revolution,
Mhm.
something altering, well, everything, the land, politics, just our daily habits.
And to really get why this mattered for education, he asks us to picture life just, say, 2 or 3 generations before his time. It was drastically different.
How so?
Well, the household was the main place where things got made. Industry happened at home.
Right, he paints this really vivid picture. Kids weren't just sitting around. They were involved, or at least they saw the whole process of making things.
Like clothing, you saw the sheep sheared, the wool carded, spun, woven. Light wasn't just a switch. It was seeing animal fat rendered, wicks made, candles dipped.
Food, furniture, it all came from nearby, often. And the whole process from the raw stuff to the finished thing, it was visible. You could see it happen.
Precisely. And everyone in the household, kids included, had a role. They were brought into these tasks gradually. Now, Dewey argues this provided huge educational benefits that were getting lost.
What kind of benefits?
Things like training in order, industry, responsibility, this sense of obligation to contribute, to produce something useful. He says personalities were, quote, bred and tested in the medium of action.
That phrase really sticks with you. And the detail about needing this close and intimate acquaintance
Yeah.
with real things and materials, with actual processes.
And understanding their social necessities and uses. That's key.
Yeah, he says it trained observation, ingenuity, constructive imagination, logical thought, and crucially, a sense of reality.
He has this powerful quote, something like, no number of object lessons can afford even the shadow of a substitute for acquaintance with the plants and animals acquired through actual living among them and caring for them.
So pictures in a book just don't cut it.
Not even close, according to him. You need that hands-on living engagement.
Okay, so the modern world brings games, right? Broader views, tolerance, he acknowledges that. But the big question is, how do we keep those gains and bring back that vital other side of life? The occupations involving physical stuff, personal responsibility.
And the school's first kind of gut reaction, as he saw it, was just to add stuff. Manual training, shop work, sewing, cooking.
Things we still see today, often.
Absolutely. But Dewey was pretty critical of the reasons usually given for adding them.
Like what? Just keeping kids busy. Or maybe making them useful at home, preparing for a job.
Exactly. He thought those reasons missed the deeper point. His vision was way bigger. He said, don't think of these as just separate studies or practical skills. Think of them as methods of life.
Methods of life.
Yeah, the fundamental social processes that make a community function. So bringing them into school isn't just about adding shop class. It's about making the school an agency for bringing home primal necessities of community life.
Okay, that shifts the whole frame.
It transforms the school, in his view, into a genuine form of active community life, instead of a place set apart in which to learn lessons.
Wow. So school becomes a community, not just a lesson factory. He defines society as people working together, common goals, sharing thoughts, feeling connected.
And here's a core insight for him. The traditional school can't be a natural social unit. Why? Because it lacks this common and productive activity.
He contrasts it with the playground.
Right. On the playground, kids organize themselves naturally through shared games, shared activities. There's a common purpose.
But the old classroom, he says, mere absorption of facts and truths is so exclusively individual and affair that it tends very naturally to pass into selfishness.
Learning becomes competitive, getting ahead of others, helping someone else. That might even be seen as a school crime, as he puts it.
Yikes.
But, he argues, bring in active shared work and that dynamic flips. Helping isn't cheating. It's aid in setting free the powers of the group. You get free communication, interchange of ideas, suggestions, results.
So competition changes too.
Yeah, it shifts from who knows the most facts to the quality of the shared work. You establish a genuine community standard. School life starts organizing itself on a social basis.
And this connects directly to discipline, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If the goal is just passive learning, discipline means enforcing silence and attention. But if the goal is social cooperation and community life, discipline arises from the activity itself. It becomes about working together effectively.
He says the only discipline that stands by us is the got through life itself. Makes sense. Learning from books only sticks if it connects to experience.
And the traditional school, being so isolated from life, basically starves kids of that essential experience, which he calls the mother of all discipline.
So bringing in these active occupations is not just making school fun. It's about revitalizing the whole spirit of the place.
Making it the child's habitat where they learn through directed living, it becomes a miniature community and an embryonic society.
But he's careful to distinguish this from just recreating the old household, right?
Yes, very important distinction. In the school, these activities are freed from all economic stress. The aim isn't profit or producing goods for sale.
The aim is the child's growth.
Exactly, the development of social power and insight. And this liberation, this freedom from economic pressure, is what allows these everyday activities to become allies of art and centers of science and history.
That's a fascinating link. How does that work? Like with geography?
He sees geography as a unifier. It presents the earth as the enduring home of the occupations of man. We understand the world, he says, through what we do in and with the world. Our activities shape our understanding.
So school occupations aren't just about making things, they're launch pads.
Active centers of scientific insight, he calls them. Starting points to grasp the historic development of man, not just technical. Oh yeah, the kids finding it took ages, like 30 minutes to get less than an ounce of fiber by hand. And suddenly, boom! They understand why their ancestors wore wool. It wasn't just choice, it was necessity.
Then they kind of reinvent simple tools, trace the history of the loom, see its impact.
And the science isn't abstract physics learned from a book, it's in the activity. Studying fibers, figuring out where materials grow, geography, the physics of the machines they're using or building.
And history becomes the story of these inventions and their effects. He has that amazing line about concentrating the history of all mankind into the evolution of the flax, cotton, and wool fibers into clothing.
It just brings it all together. These activities provide real motivation, firsthand experience, contact with reality, and they get liberalized throughout by connecting them to history and science. Theory and practice meet.
Which naturally leads to how you teach science. Modern life needs science.
And these occupations provide the perfect context. Science isn't just facts to memorize, it illuminates the activities, makes them freighted with meaning.
It also connects to the worker understanding their own work, right? Not just being a cog.
Exactly. Avoiding that problem where someone is just carrying out another person's ideas without understanding the purpose. Work needs meaning to the person doing it.
He seems genuinely puzzled by critics calling this approach materialistic or menial.
Yeah, he basically says they must be living in a different reality. The real world is full of occupations. The goal isn't to ignore that, but to help everyone see the large and human significance in their work.
He connects the problem of workers becoming mere appendages to the machines, partly to education failing them.
Failing to help them develop the imagination and insight to see the social and scientific value in what they do.
He also argues that if you ignore kids' natural constructive impulses in school, how can they possibly understand or deal with economic issues later?
It leaves them unprepared. And he even zooms out further, looking at the history of learning itself. He points out that for centuries, learning was exclusive, tied to manuscripts, a monopoly of a small class. But then printing, the Industrial Revolution, they liquefied knowledge, put it into circulation.
So a separate learned class just doesn't make sense anymore.
It's an anachronism, he says. Information is flowing, and this changes the school's role.
The merely intellectual life gets a very altered value. He even notes that academic and scholastic were starting to sound like criticisms back then.
And he slams the existing school curriculum for being stuck in that old model, still obsessed with mastering symbols as the main goal, like a medieval conception of learning.
So when people worried that adding manual training or art would make kids too specialized or take away from liberal culture,
He flips it completely. He says, no, the current education is the specialized one. It's narrow, one-sided, focused almost entirely on intellectual absorption of symbols, while ignoring these fundamental human impulses to make, do, create, produce.
and the result is this split.
This huge divide between the cultured elite and the workers, theory totally divorced from practice. And things like high dropout rates. He sees them as a direct symptom. Most kids don't go on to higher ed.
Because for many, that practical impulse to do things is stronger than the purely intellectual one.
Right. And social realities limit purely intellectual paths for many. So kids leave school once they have the basics needed to get a job. Leaders talk about culture, but students just see school as a narrowly practical tool.
So Dewey's fixes.
Broaden the aim of education. Include activities that appeal to that deep-seated need to do and to make. Then school becomes more vital, holds on to kids longer, and actually delivers more culture because it's culture connected to life.
Okay, so the big takeaway from this first part, society changed, driven by industry. Education has to change just as radically.
It has to catch up. He sees hints of it happening, manual training, nature study, but the real goal is deeper.
Organize these things. Make schools into miniature, active communities built around occupations reflecting society.
And permeate them with art, history, science. This, he believes, trains kids for real membership in society, service, self-direction. It guarantees a larger society which is worthy, lovely, and harmonious.
Okay, that sets the stage, the world changing outside the school. Now, let's really unpack this idea of the child becoming the center of gravity. Dewey's second lecture focuses right on the school's relationship to the child's life and development.
And he kicks it off with just a brilliant, telling anecdote. He was out shopping for school desks, and the dealer, showing him the options, just casually remarks, "These are all for listening."
Wow, that says it all, doesn't it? You immediately picture it, the traditional classroom. Rows of identical, ugly desks, bolted down, no room to move, bare walls.
The whole physical setup screams one thing: passive activity. Sit still, absorb, take notes. All made for listening. Even studying from a book, he argues, is just another kind of listening dependence on the author or teacher.
It breeds passivity, absorption, this idea that knowledge is just ready-made materials waiting to be poured in.
And that's why, he says, active things like shop or cooking get dismissed as fads and frills. They just don't fit the listening model.
He tells that story about the woman who visited 24 schools.
Yeah, looking for just one where the child's own activity came before getting information, or where kids actually had a real motive for needing the information. 24 schools.
That's pretty damning. And he links this passive design to needing to manage kids en masse.
Treat them like a block, a uniform group. But, he points out, the moment children act, they individualize themselves. They stop being a mass.
Which explains the uniform methods in curriculum too, right? Same lecture, same textbook for everyone.
Little room for adjustment. Knowledge is just this fixed thing, chopped up by grade level, hoping kids remember some of it. He mentions examples from France and the US boasting about this kind of rigid uniformity.
So the old education, passivity, treating kids like interchangeable parts in a machine, uniformity. The key, he says, is the center of gravity, is outside the child.
It's in the teacher, the textbook, the lesson plan. The school is fundamentally not the place where the child lives.
And the revolution he's talking about,
It's literally a shifting of the center of gravity, making the child the center.
He uses that great Copernican analogy.
Perfect, isn't it? Just like Copernicus showed the sun, not the earth, was the center, Dewey says the child becomes the sun about which the appliances of education revolve. Everything orbits the child.
He compares this new vision to the ideal home. How do kids learn best at home?
Through natural conversation, sure, but also by participating in what's going on, the cooking, cleaning, fixing things. They learn order, responsibility, considering others, fitting their actions into the group's needs.
These aren't formal lessons, they're just life.
Exactly. Opportunities for knowledge and habits arise naturally, and he suggests an ideal home might even have a small workshop, a garden, maybe a simple lab, chances to explore outside.
So the ideal school is like taking that rich home learning and making it systematic.
Organizing it, generalizing it. It's like an enlarged home, more kids, more adults, richer social life, but the activities are specifically chosen for the child's growth, not just incidental chores.
In this kind of school, the life of the child becomes the all-controlling aim. Everything serves that.
Learning still happens, of course, but it's learning through and in relation to this living. You live first, and learn as part of living. And when you focus on the child's actual life, you see immediately they aren't primarily listening beings.
He also pushes back against just seeing education as drawing out something hidden inside.
Right. He stresses children are already intensely active. The job of education isn't just to let things emerge, it's to take hold of his activities, of giving them direction.
Direction towards valuable results, not just random expression.
Which leads to a common worry people have about child-centered ideas.
Yeah.
If you start with these raw, messy kid impulses, where does the discipline come from? How do they learn facts, get culture?
It sounds like chaos to some people.
Dewey says, look, it's only a problem if you just indulge the impulses, let them run wild without guidance. But if you provide organized materials, equipment, and thoughtful direction, you can guide those activities towards logical, meaningful outcomes.
I love his take on, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride.
It's great, isn't it? Real learning isn't just wishing for something. It's the process of realizing that wish.
Which means hitting obstacles.
Needing ingenuity, patience, persistence, focus. And that whole process is the discipline, and it's how you gain real knowledge along the way.
Like his example of a child wanting to make a box.
It's not just poof, a box appears. It's planning, choosing wood, measuring, figuring out proportions, preparing the pieces, sawing carefully, planing, fitting them together.
That requires learning about tools, materials, processes.
And it builds discipline, perseverance, effort, attention to detail. Information comes naturally as part of the making.
For the child wanting to cook, it's not just messing around.
No. To actually cook something edible, you have to deal with the actual world of hard conditions. Heat, ingredients behaving certain ways, timing. You have to accommodate reality.
And that accommodation is discipline and knowledge gain.
He tells that story about the kids wanting an egg recipe.
Right. And the teacher gets them to experiment instead.
Yeah, cooking eggs at different temperatures, seeing what happens to the white. They realized just following instructions didn't help them understand. But through experimenting, they grasped the principle how heat affects albumin.
That's such a clear illustration. It's not educative to just follow steps blindly.
The educative part is, as he says, to realize his own impulse by recognizing the facts, materials, and conditions involved, and then to regulate his impulse through that recognition.
That's the key difference, directing interest versus just indulging it.
And Dewey then helpfully groups the child's inherent impulses, the raw material for growth, the natural resources, the uninvested capital into 4 types.
Okay, what are they?
1, the social instinct, conversation, communication, language. 2, the constructive impulse, making things, shaping materials. 3, the instinct of investigation, doing stuff and seeing what happens, exploring. And 4, the expressive or artistic impulse, refining communication and construction, making it meaningful and beautiful.
And these aren't separate boxes, they work together.
Absolutely. He uses textile work again to show how making a simple loom, constructive, wanting to make something specific, constructive, studying Navajo designs, artistic, discussing which design is best, social, and working within technical limits but focusing on color and texture, artistic, all integrate these impulses.
He gives another example with 7-year-olds studying primitive life.
Yeah, tapping into their natural interest in people. They imagine life stripped bare, direct contact with nature. This sparks genuine questions and provides abundant opportunity for actual study.
How does that lead to study?
Well, they might test different stones for making arrowheads. That's a hands-on mineralogy lesson. Or they try building a smelting oven, get the airflow wrong.
And suddenly they need to understand combustion.
Exactly. The need for instruction arises experimentally. They learn about different environments by imagining the conditions needed for hunting versus farming, then map it out. They grasp geography in relation to human activity.
And his conclusion. They learn way more facts this way.
Indefinitely more acquaintance with facts, he says, and crucially, more training of attention, more power of interpretation than if they were put to working out arbitrary problems simply for the sake of discipline. The discipline comes from the meaningful work itself.
This changes the whole idea of the recitation, too.
Totally. It's not about showing off what you memorized. It becomes preeminently a social meeting place, like a good conversation, but more organized. A social clearinghouse for sharing experiences, ideas, questions, fixing errors, figuring out what to explore next.
Which makes perfect sense for teaching language.
Right. Trying to teach language as a thing by itself, separate from any real need to communicate, seems absurd when you think about it this way. The natural social motive is missing in the passive classroom.
So kids climb up.
Or just repeat lessons. But when language is used socially to share real experiences and ideas, the child has something in his mind to talk about, something genuinely one's own.
He makes that distinction between having something to say and having to say something.
Huge difference. Language naturally gets richer, more precise, more controlled by reality when it serves real communication. Reading and writing then emerge as necessary tools to share and receive these experiences.
He shares those examples of kids writing about a science experiment.
The chalk experiment leading to geology, yeah. Using words like water pulls calcium out or a solution tore it out. He loves those active verbs because they show personal realization, a felt understanding.
And he points out how these simple starting points, like chalk, can lead to big investigations.
Connecting geology to geography, industry, human life across time and space, it all blossoms from that initial hands-on engagement.
So that perceived conflict, that real-life activities get in the way of real learning and discipline.
He says that's completely backward. They're the most profound way to get genuine knowledge and discipline.
And finally, he talks about imagination.
Yes. The child lives in the world of imaginative values. Imagination isn't just about fantasy or make-believe for him. It's the medium in which the child lives, seeing deeper meaning and significance in things.
So do we ignore that or use it?
Exactly. If you really believe in the child's life, then these occupations, history, science, they become tools to appeal to and cultivate that imagination.
And his definition of culture here is just beautiful. It's not surface polish.
No, it's the growth of the imagination in flexibility, in scope, and in sympathy, connecting the individual child to the larger life of nature and of society.
And that happens when nature and society are actually in the schoolroom, part of the experience.
Right, when the tools of learning serve that lived experience. Then, he says, culture becomes truly democratic, accessible to all the democratic password.
Wow. Okay, that's a powerful vision for centering school on the active child. But Dewey didn't just focus on the positive vision. He also diagnosed what was wrong with the system he saw. His third lecture tackles waste in education. And he doesn't just mean wasted dollars.
No, not primarily. He says the biggest waste, the primary waste, is that of human life. Children's time being used poorly, their preparation for life being inadequate, that's the real tragedy.
And what's the root cause of all this waste, in his view?
One word: isolation. Things aren't connected. Real organization, he says, is the opposite. It's getting things into connection.
And he sees isolation everywhere in the school system itself.
Yeah, he talks about how the different parts, primary school, grammar school, high school, university, the schools, training teachers, normal schools, technical schools, they all kind of grew up separately.
At different times in history.
Exactly, with different goals, different methods, often rooted in different philosophies. And they were never really welded into one complete whole. He pictures them like separate building blocks just sitting next to each other, not properly joined.
Can you give an example of that isolation?
Sure. He points to teacher training schools being isolated from the deep subject matter knowledge found in universities. They focus on how to teach, maybe without enough focus on what to teach deeply.
In universities.
Isolated the other way, focused on the what, advanced subject matter, but often disconnected from the realities of how children actually learn or how to teach effectively. Both sides lose out.
And the transitions between grades, like middle school?
He calls the 7th and 8th grade the intermediate school, and describes it as this kind of amorphous composite, sometimes repeating basics, sometimes just prepping mechanically for high school, but often having no special meaning on its own account. Just a messy junction box.
And those different historical goals, discipline, culture, utility, they persist and fragment the curriculum.
Right. You end up teaching arithmetic partly for discipline, partly for practical use, literature for culture, grammar maybe just for discipline, geography for utility and culture. The subjects become centrifugal, he says, flying apart instead of connecting.
So what's the solution? Just rearrange the blocks inside the school system.
No, he says that's not enough. That creates only an artificial unity. The real solution is to connect every part of the school system to life itself. You have to break down the walls between the school and the world.
See the school as part of the larger whole of social life.
Exactly. He visualizes this. Imagine the school system at the center, but with arrows reaching out, connecting it actively to the home, to the natural environment, gardens, parks, the countryside, to business life, and up to the university with its research labs and libraries.
And the most critical waste comes from the lack of these connections.
That's what he argues. The child can't easily use their outside experiences in school, and they can't readily apply school learning to their daily life. That gap, that's the fundamental isolation of the school. It's isolation from life.
He describes a child starting school almost having to leave their real-world interests at the door.
Yeah, put aside all the ideas and activities from home and the neighborhood, and then the school has to work really hard, painfully, he says, to try and stir up some artificial interest in abstract school subjects.
That story about the kids in Moline, Illinois?
Oh, the Mississippi River. It's perfect. They were studying geography, learning about the Mississippi in their textbooks, but were apparently surprised to realize it was the same river flowing right past their town.
Geography was just a school subject, totally disconnected from their reality.
Exactly, and he applies the same logic to connecting school and business life, not about narrow job training, but about helping kids understand the economic world around them in a broader, liberalized way.
He mocks those old arithmetic problems.
The ridiculously complex business partnership problems that stayed in textbooks for centuries for the sake of mental discipline, long after they had any practical relevance.
Yeah.
Or pointless percentage problems disconnected from how banking actually worked even then.
Meanwhile, kids could be learning meaningful math by understanding how a real bank functions.
Precisely. There are plenty of real connections possible if you look for them.
And the connection to the university. He wants much freer interaction.
Yes. He worries that lower schools often teach trivial things or outdated facts because they're cut off from the forefront of knowledge creation happening in universities. You can only really get the spirit of inquiry, he argues, through genuine inquiry connected to real knowledge. The most advanced parts need to interact with the earliest stages.
He uses another visual for this connection, right?
Yeah.
Like the school building expanding.
Yeah, imagine the school building literally swelling out, organically connected to its surroundings. Home, garden country, business, university. And inside this expanded school, you have practical areas, kitchen, textile room, workshops, but they're all connected to a central library.
The library is the hub.
It's the intellectual center. The workshops and kitchen are the practice. The library represents the theory, the accumulated wisdom, the ideas that illuminate and give meaning to the practice. It's about connecting to life outside while meeting the child's need for action inside, balancing the social and the individual.
And those practical areas, like the kitchen, become bridges.
Exactly. Bridges to the home kids bring home experience to school cooking, apply school learning back home. Bridges to the natural environment. Where do the food materials come from? Soil, sun, water. That's a natural way into science.
He contrasts this with old-style botany, just collecting and naming parts.
Right. Versus studying plants in their environment, their uses, how they relate to human life. Cooking becomes practical chemistry. He scoffs at the idea that young kids can't learn science just because they don't grasp abstract atoms yet. That's isolating science from experience.
The workshops connect outwards, too.
To materials from the country, to physics, energy, commerce, art, design, architecture. And they connect upwards to university engineering labs, scientific methods.
And the library's role is crucial. It's where the doing leads to thinking.
It's the place you bring the experiences, the problems, the questions that arise from the workshops. You discuss them, compare notes, and get new light from the experience of others, the accumulated wisdom of the world symbolized in the library.
This is his organic relation of theory and practice.
You do things and you get the idea, the intellectual understanding that makes the doing richer, and every idea should loop back and find application and experience affect how you live.
Which clarifies the role of books and reading.
Vital tools, harmful if they replace experience, but all important in interpreting and expanding experience.
He even imagines this upper level labs and studios.
Yeah, like a symbolic upper story. Science labs, physics, chemistry, biology grow out of problems from the workshops and kitchen. Figuring out the forces in a spinning wheel, understanding the botany of plants used in cooking or sewing.
And art and music.
Not just add-ons. They're the culmination, the idealization, the refinement of the practical work. Art grows organically from skilled craft, carrying spiritual meaning into everyday forms. It avoids being forced or sentimental. It involves the physical skills plus the idea, the spirit, a living union of thought and the instrument of expression.
He brings it all back to the textile room example again.
As a synthesis, yeah. It's a workshop, practice. It uses materials, science. It connects to history, origins, evolution. It presents problems, discipline. Culture arises from seeing it all through science and history, appreciating the skill, adding artistic design. His ideal shop is almost a living museum.
A pictured museum, linking everything.
Linking art, science, industry, history through materials, pictures, historical examples, literature, like Penelope weaving, even music, spinning songs. It's all interconnected.
So the grand vision, school connected to life, home experience used in school, school learning applied back home.
The school becomes an organic whole, not just isolated parts stuck together. The isolation of subjects disappears because all studies grow out of relations. In the one great common world, his punchline. Relate the school to life, and all studies are of necessity correlated.
And those competing aims, culture, discipline, information, utility.
They stop being separate goals you try to juggle. They become different phases or aspects of one single unifying aim. The growth of the child in the direction of social capacity and service, his larger and more vital union with life.
And his own school, the University Elementary School, was meant to be a model for this.
A place to work out this unification in practice. Using university resources for the elementary school and letting the school's practical experience inform university thinking about education. Breaking down the barriers, showing, as he put it, there is no lower and higher, but simply education.
And serving as a laboratory.
Yes, a lab to test these principles, demonstrate that this kind of organization and these methods were actually feasible. Not for others to copy blindly, but to provide a demonstration. He believed finding the truth about how kids learn best was the most practical thing in the world in the long run.
Okay, so we've got the theory, the critique, the grand vision, what actually happened when they tried to build this. The last part of the book gives us a glimpse into the University Elementary School's first 3 years, from a talk Dewey gave in early 1899.
Right, he gives some basic facts.
Okay.
It started small, January 1896, just 15 kids, grew to 95 within 3 years. They moved around a bit, hoping for a permanent building.
What about funding? Was this expensive?
It wasn't cheap. Funding grew from maybe $1,300, $1,400 a year to $12,000. Tuition covered about half, so donations were crucial. He notes the cost per student was high, around $120 a year then, but uses it to argue for better funding, maybe even endowments for elementary education specifically.
And he restates the school's dual purpose.
Yeah, educating these specific children well and serving as this pedagogical laboratory for the university's work.
Now, this is really interesting. He stresses they didn't start with a fixed blueprint from him.
Yes, that's a key point he makes. He counters the assumption that he just wrote down his ideas and told teachers to implement them. He says they began with questions, with problems they wanted to investigate through practice.
The teacher started with question marks.
Exactly. The curriculum, the methods, they evolved from the actual work and discoveries made by the teachers and students together.
So what were the big questions driving the experiment? He lists 4 main ones.
Right. First, how do we really connect the school closely with the child's home and neighborhood life? Break down those walls, unify the child's experience, use those natural home interests for real learning, not just for fun. How do we get substantial, positive, subject matter, history, science, art into the curriculum in a way that's genuinely significant for the child, something worthy of attainment? He was really critical of how much early schooling, like 75–80%, focused just on the mechanics of symbols, reading, writing, numbers, instead of on actual truth, insight, beauty. They aimed to figure out what meaningful content looked like.
Okay. Third question.
How do we teach those essential formal skills, reading, writing, arithmetic, but have them grow out of everyday experiences and occupations? Connect them to activities with richer content so the child feels the need for the symbols, sees their specific use, rather than just getting big doses of abstract symbols taught in isolation.
Makes sense. And the fourth?
This one's very practical. How do we give genuine individual attention to each child? Their answer involved small groups, maybe 8-10 kids per teacher, meaning a larger teaching staff overall, systematically supervising not just academics, but physical and moral growth too. He says this individual attention was tied up with all the school's aims and methods.
So what did the school actually do day to day? He talks about manual training.
Shop work, cooking, textiles. He saw these as the most easy and natural method to maintain that active, engaged attitude children have outside school. It wasn't just busy work, it was about directing physical activity towards systematic intellectual development later on.
But challenging work, right?
Yeah.
Not just easy stuff.
Oh, yeah. The challenge was making it continuous, leading kids through difficulties. The activities were chosen carefully to demand different skills, different kinds of thinking, and also because they represented fundamental human activities providing shelter, food, clothing, and they inherently trained senses, provided exercise, developed memory, judgment, orderliness.
And these activities were the foundation for other subjects.
Just like the theory predicted, chemistry grew out of cooking experiments. Number work and geometry emerged from the measuring and building and carpentry. Geography was linked to where textile materials came from or where food grew. History was explored through the invention of tools and their social consequences.
He gives some details on the curriculum development, especially history and science.
History started with younger kids exploring home occupations, then larger industries, then moving chronologically through the development of industry and invention from early human stages up to the Iron Age, but focusing on progress, not just dwelling on primitive aspects. Then American history, followed by Greek and Roman history in the upper grades.
And science.
That was apparently trickier to systematize at first. Early years focused on cultivating observation, interest in plants and animals. Then geography became a center point. The Earth is our home. They also focused on applied science, understanding forces and machines through things kids encountered, like telegraphs, clocks, locks, building a foundation for formal physics experimentally. And chemistry, again, largely through cooking.
Music and art were important too.
Definitely. Not just for aesthetic reasons, but he argued they were valuable for intellectual development too, training attention, observation, seeing how parts relate to a whole.
How do they structure the teaching? Small groups, but specialists too.
Yeah, small groups of 8-10 with a main supervising teacher. But they gradually developed departmental specialists for areas like science, history, domestic arts, manual training, music, art, gym. He foresaw languages and math becoming more specialized later, too.
Did having specialists make it hard to keep things connected?
He addresses that concern. He argues the specialists bring diverse knowledge that actually enriches the common themes and projects, rather than fragmenting them if managed well.
And what about the moral side, discipline, community feeling?
The ideal was the best form of family life, not a rigid, graded school. Small groups, close teacher-student relationships, varied activities, these all made it possible. They allowed more freedom than traditional schools, but he insists this wasn't about less discipline.
It was about different kinds of responsibility.
Yeah. Exactly. Giving children larger and less artificial responsibilities as part of the community's work, aiming for harmonious and complete development. He mentions parents confirming the kids loved coming to school, but the atmosphere was one of focused work, not just play. Freedom, under guidance, was seen as a way to build character.
So, after 3 years, what was the verdict? Did it work?
He sounds quite positive. He felt they had found affirmative answers to those initial 4 big questions. Parents showed support through increased enrollment and willingness to pay fees. Good teachers interested in this kind of work were available.
And the kids.
The crucial finding, he implies, was that yes, children could truly live in school this way. They could grow in wisdom, kindness, responsibility, gain necessary knowledge and discipline, and actually find learning delightful, all through engaging with meaningful work in a connected environment.
Okay, so stepping back from all the details, what's the really powerful takeaway from this deep dive into Dewey's The School and Society? For me, it's crystal clear his vision wasn't just about, adding shop class or cooking.
No, it was way more fundamental than that. A genuine revolution in thinking. Making school a place where children are fully alive, an active community that's deeply connected to the world around them, not separate from it.
And he really nailed the core problem, didn't he? that waste in education coming from the tragic isolation of the school.
Isolation from real life, and also the fragmentation within the school system itself. His solution wasn't just tinkering, it was radical reconnection.
Unite the school to life. That seems to be the key.
That's the absolute key. He argued that's what brings coherence, relevance, meaning. Then all those other goals, discipline, knowledge, culture, they stop being separate things to chase and become natural phases of a child's growth into a capable, connected social being.
And here's the thing that really gets you thinking. Maybe it feels a little, I don't know, provocative for us today. Dewey wrote this over a century ago. She saw this transformation as necessary, even starting to happen then.
But you look around now.
Yeah, look around. How much of this truly radical change has actually permeated education widely today?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder.
What does it tell us, maybe about our ongoing challenges? That the very problems he diagnosed, that feeling of school being separate from real life, the struggle to make learning feel necessary and connected, the persistence of passive listening.
That these are still central debates in education, 120 plus years later?
Are our schools perhaps still too focused on that listening model, still primarily dealing in symbols, maybe sometimes failing to fully harness the incredible, messy, powerful potential of doing and making as paths to deep understanding and vital connection?
Something definitely for all of us to ponder.